space to be national trainers for Gracious Space, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that into Council PTSA to help us with our work around healing and being able to reach other communities. And also anti-racism, and I'm going to be taking over the DEI work for the remainder of the year, and mentoring and working with other people. And the other thing that I'm trying to do, I've been with Council for a while, maybe 15, 14 years. And I'm trying to leave the knowledge and wisdom that's within me, within Council. So I'm working to mentor and to share with everybody that I can. So anyway, tonight I'm going to be doing a presentation basically on our history, branding, legacy, and advocacy, and just the power of our collective action. The PowerPoint and what I have to present is a lot, and so I don't want to delay. And so I am going to have June go ahead and get started, and then we'll just welcome people in as they come in the room. So this is what I'm going to try to focus on for us tonight. And we can go to slide 2 if you want, June. I think it's really important to understand where we come from and to honor our founders. Our original mission and vision statement is something that has held true for 125 years. This is 125 years anniversary for us as PTA, and I just want to go ahead and read it. The National Congress of Mothers, irrespective of creed, color, or condition, stand for all parenthood, all childhood, all homehood. Its platform is the universe, and its organization is the human race. Alice Burney, when she became a mother, like many of us, it changed how she saw the world. Phoebe Hearst was her sister-in-law, and they partnered and they started the National Congress of Mothers. Many years later, Selena Sloan Butler out of Georgia, the wife of a doctor, just a very influential advocate, started to partner with them. And then in the 1920s, formed the National Congress of Colored Parents and Teachers. And in a time where women did not have a ability to vote, and you'll see this in the video that we'll share, they worked alongside each other. They wanted Selena Sloan Butler to join their organization, and she said Black children cannot thrive on top of a white organization. And these women were very, very strategic in how they worked and collaborated. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. At our founding meeting in 1897, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was a free Black woman who made her living as a poet. She was an abolitionist, remained a free woman her whole life. She was a speaker. And during her speech, I want to read what she said. I do not ask any special favor for the colored mother. I do ask that you give what we cannot touch with our hands, the ideal things that cannot be measured with line nor weighted in a balance. And this is very, very significant. And a lot of people do not really understand this. And so it's just, really important. And it just goes to show the declaration that they opened the National Congress of Mothers to all races. And then we can go on to the next slide. And so we're going to take PTA history, and I will let the video go ahead and share with us the history of who we are.
At the time of the birth of my last little daughter, an idea came to me. Why not have a national congress of mothers whose growth would quickly become international?
With those few words, Alice McClellan Burney shared the moment of birth for an organization that transformed forever the world's perception of how society should treat children. In 1897, and for decades surrounding it, many children, especially the poor, were given little or no education and put to work to help support their families. The work was hard, the hours long, and the toll on their childhood devastating. Alice wanted to change that. She found the perfect ally in Phoebe Hearst, wealthy philanthropist and wife of Senator George Hearst. The two women set about organizing a national meeting of mothers and fathers to address the pressing issues of child labor and education. With the help of Phoebe's son, Randolph, and his publication connections, word of the event was spread across the country. Even so, Alice remained humble about her expectations for attendance.
I shall be satisfied even if only 25 mothers are there.
That first convention of the National Congress of Mothers, held in February 1897, was attended by more than 2,000 people. During the meeting, a platform and a declaration of principles were established to guide the mission of the organization. The PTA found friends in both the U.S. Congress and the White House, with allies like President Teddy Roosevelt, whose involvement, along with other leaders, further reinforced the early mandate to include fathers in the movement. As the association moved forward into the early 1900s, it grew from 100,000 members to 2.5 million, which included members of the National Congress of Colored Parents and Teachers, founded by Selina Sloan Butler, a dedicated and tireless pioneer and advocate of opportunities for both children and women. The spirited work of Selina and her colleagues led in time to the unification of her organization with the National Congress of Parents and Teachers. As the association grew, it reinforced standing policy issues and introduced new initiatives that established the association as the world's primary child advocate, always mindful of its primary objectives. One of the earliest initiatives set by the founders was universal kindergarten, pioneering in what is today a standard component of our education system. Early concern about childhood health issues resulted in the PTA initiating and then spearheading federal school lunch legislation. It was the PTA that succeeded in taking federal legislation to individual states, working for and enacting child labor laws. Almost from the beginning, the PTA recognized the need for better treatment for juveniles in the legal system, passing a resolution endorsing a new concept called juvenile courts. For over 100 years, the PTA has left its imprint on broad social programs and education for children. Despite a century of hard work and accomplishments, there is much more to do. We are at a critical intersection in our history that demands even more from all of us if social and educational programs for children and families are not to be deprioritized. The association has not forgotten its bread and butter issue, families engaged in the education of their children. It has advocated for the introduction of the Family Engagement in Education Act. This legislation incentivizes schools and districts to meaningfully engage families in an effort to close the achievement gap. Many of the PTA's accomplishments since it was founded have been achieved because supporters like you created a partnership of purpose to ensure their success. It can be done. Alice Burney foresaw it.
Make the child the watchword and the ward of the day and hour. Let all else be secondary, and coming generations will behold a new world and a new people.
Okay, so that gave you a little bit of the history of where we are. And I want to talk about what brought together the National Congress of Mothers, and then the National Congress of Colored Parents and Teachers. So around the time of the board versus Brown versus the Board of Education, that work started in 1955, if you can really see from the PowerPoint. And then in 1967, President Claire B. Gay really started working to unify the two organizations. And in 1970, the National PTA, National Congress of Mothers, became the National PTA, and the National Congress of Colored and Parent Teachers, they united and became one. And we can go to the next slide. And so you'll see this is 51 years of unification for us. And it's pretty much a big deal. But just like Selena Sloan Butler, I do want to read the statement that, that Claire B. Gay said at the time. She said, only Black parents can speak for Black children. And so often we have other people speaking for our children. And so this is a picture of Selena Sloan Butler, the founder, and then Claire B. Gay, who was the last president before our two organizations became one for the PTA that we now know. I also have a picture, and this comes from Seattle Public Schools. And this is a quote from our former superintendent, Dr. Nyland, that eliminating opportunity gaps is an issue for our times. And that's something that we're working on as a school board. And then our adoption and our shift to student outcomes focused governance to really make sure that we're doing what we need to for all kids. I want to go to the next slide. We're going to share the statements of Marin, Wright, Edelman, just a very strong child advocate. And she partnered with PTA. As you can see, this is a commitment that was made in 2014. And we still haven't fulfilled what she's saying as an organization. But this is about 5 minutes. I'm going to have June go ahead and start this video.
I'm very glad that the PTA is focusing on African American children this month. We need to focus on them every day, and I'm very pleased that you are targeting certain groups of children along your whole course of the year, because obviously all children have to be our concern. But those children who are left behind and who are disproportionately poor and of color do need our special help. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the African American child. It is a disgrace that our country lets children be the poorest group of Americans, and the Black child is the poorest of the poor. And the younger children are, and the younger Black children are, the poorer they are. And I hope that this will be the beginning of attention and focused effort on the Black child that will be persistent, because they need urgent and persistent attention. It's shocking that 6 states, Kentucky, Michigan, Mississippi, Ohio, Oregon, and Wisconsin, half, and I never get used to these figures, half, 50% or more of Black children are poor. 50% of Black children are poor, and in half of our states, over 40% of Black children are poor. This is a disgrace. If you can't read or compute in this country, you're being sentenced to social economic death, and yet 60% of all of our children and 80% of all Black children and almost 80% of all Latino children cannot read or compute in 4th or 8th grade. This is a disaster, parents and teachers, and we've got to do better. We've got to get every child ready for school. High quality early childhood education is the foundation for children doing well in school and for high school graduation. It's cost effective. We can't afford not to do it. And so it is our top policy priority this year, and I do hope that all of you in the PTA will make your voices heard with every one of your senators and congressmen. 2-year-olds don't have any politics. 4-year-olds don't have any politics. And the science and research on rapid brain development is very clear. And so we need to get the investment that a number of people now have proposed in the Congress for 0 through pre-K, not to pre-K. I am for a universal pre-K system. I love the fact that we're talking about We're broadening home visiting and early Head Start, and making sure that we have universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. But I also am deeply concerned about kindergarten, and only 12 states mandate full-day kindergarten by statute, and you have new Common Core standards that are coming into place. It's so important that we also have kindergarten, and that every child has a strong foundation to be able to read and learn by 4th grade, because that's crucial. And our high school graduation rates are inadequate. The Black child is less likely to graduate than others and to go on to college, and they're at risk of a cradle-to-prison pipeline that sends a Black boy born in 2001, 1 in 3 chance that boy has of going to prison in his lifetimes. And we've got to begin to pay attention to how the schools are engaging children, and not putting them out or feeding them into the juvenile justice system and therefore into the cradle-to-prison pipeline. And I want to just highlight the importance of examining your discipline policies. We're working with the American Association of School Administrators now on trying to figure out how we can keep children in school. I have never understood why you put children out of school in our schools, why we put children out of school in our schools. For truants and targets for not coming to school. Find out why they are not coming to school and get them in school. I think we've got to find a way to engage our children and to have non-exclusionary methods of dealing with discipline problems. And Black boys and Black girls and children with special needs are those who are most at risk of being unfairly and unjustly suspended. And so I hope we will look at these practices. Make sure that schools are welcoming places. Make sure that all of our schools and teachers have high expectations for every child. Believe in children and let them understand that they can believe in themselves. Our job is to educate them, but we can educate them through empowering them. And so thank you for what you're doing. Teachers and parents together as partners can really transform the world. That is probably the most important partnership there is, and we look forward to working with you going forward. We have just issued our 2014...
Stop it now, June. And we can go to the next slide. So 2013, I was asked by Washington State PTA to represent Washington State for the National Congress of the States. Every year, the states come together and converge. I was very fortunate, and I was able to meet our president, Otha Thornton, and watched him get installed as our first Black president. And his partnership and his advocacy and support for Seattle Council started then. And I will be honest, in my first weeks of presidency in 2016, if it wasn't for this man, I would have walked away and I wouldn't be here today. And so he says, I leave you this weekend with the hope that National PTA has a new appreciation for the fact that America is not a monolithic place with a monolithic people or monolithic ideas. And so his presidency really helped us to focus on diversity and inclusion. The diversity and inclusion toolkit was done under his leadership. And he's still always ready to work and support Seattle Council. One of the things he did go through the Gracious Space training, the master program with those from PTA who were a part. And he's willing to do a gracious space in Robertsville. So that's something that I am looking forward to doing. And then we can go on to the next slide. In 2013, I also had the pleasure of meeting Anna King, and she was running for a state office. And I was walking down the street talking about welcoming. I don't know how she knew, but we were in Ohio, and she said PTA, and just instantly gave me a warm welcome. She is the current president. When I did go back, I think it might have been 2017, to LegCon, to Verge on the Hill with PTA. This is our 125th year. If your PTA can afford it and you can go, I encourage you to send a couple people to convention. We normally have LegCon in February, but this year they're doing the Legislative Assembly and the conference back to back. And so I tell you this story because in the founders room, we met right in the room of the first PTA meeting. And I just told her, you know, I see you and I see you as a future national PTA president. So to see her as a president does my heart good. And Anna feels strong that being an inclusive association is the key to better serving children, families, and community across the country. Under her leadership, PTA will focus its work in three key areas: growth in our mission and membership, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. These areas will help us to emphasize on diversity, equity, and inclusion for justice, and the PTA brand, which includes culture and communication for a new era and advocacy for impact at all levels. So that is our current president until 2013. And we can go to the next slide, and then we're going to be going into a breakout room. You guys have gotten a lot of information from the slides and from what I've shared. But now I want you to take all that information, the journey that you've been on with the first part of this presentation. And Seattle Public Schools is committed to 180 days of excellence in action. And as we go into a breakout room, I just want us to discuss what role does your PTA play in making this a reality for all students. We are a partner with the district in this work. And so I think June does have some breakout rooms together. And so if we can just take maybe, I think it's like 7 minutes, it's not a real long time, and then we'll do a share out so that we can learn together. So June is going to assign us breakout rooms.
Sabrina, did you want to, Sam?
I can. I just was trying to go into a breakout room where we didn't have a council person. So if we don't have a council person in one of the breakout rooms, I can't go. Oh, broad message. Oh, I can't see.
Do you want me to put you in a one?
Put me in a room, but if there's somebody without a council person, I'd rather go there just to cover. Okay, perfect.
I'll
Thank
put you in there. Sam, do you want to go to breakout room with no council person?
Sure.
Okay, I will put you in room 5. There we go. 2, 3. Oh, there's so many people in here.
June, I'm still with you. Is there another room that needs a council person?
Yeah, it says that you're not, and you're supposed to be in room 2, but you didn't.
I think it didn't put me in there because I joined as a host somehow.
Oh, weird.
So I can join room 2. Do you want me to go in? I can do it on my own. Okay, I'll see you later.
Okay, bye. It was lonely in here.
Hoda, would you be willing to put your email in the chat? I'd love to reach out to you to get some of that.
Yes, definitely. I'll do that. Thank
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Welcome back.
Sabrina, you muted. Sorry about that. I wanted to just to offer. We didn't ask for a reporter or somebody to scribe, but if we can just take a few people to give a takeaway from what you learned or what was discussed that maybe you want to bring out to the larger group so that we can learn together.
Yes, Sabrina, I can go. So my group, what I have learned was that I think all of us are doing equity lens in our building, supporting our school through some of us say it's the state and local level. And then also we talked about using the racial equity lens from the district, and then doing some advocacy. For some of us are involved budget level, and then also I have a school who said they're focusing on actually including diversity with LGBT students also as well.
Anybody else want to come off mute and share?
I can share. So from our group, it sounded like, you know, a lot of folks are having the same conversations about kind of bringing equity into the PTA conversation. Some of us are in the more early stages of just understanding how to socialize and make equity a core part of PTA work. And it sounds like a lot of people are struggling with that, and kind of, you know, in these small groups, it's great. And then we go back to our schools and it's, you know, hard to be as well received. And so I think at least there was some solidarity in that struggle. And maybe we talked about maybe just, you know, at least connecting between schools and talking further.
We have one more person who might want to share out before we start back to the PowerPoint. Okay, I won't force. We still have plenty to go. So if we can go to slide 11. And so this pyramid, I'm going to be honest, I started Nordstrom's July 3rd, 1979, and I graduated June 79. And this is a strong business model. Seattle Public Schools and Nordstrom's have the same corporate branding as far as being a decentralized centralization. And this is what I have been working for, to see students and families and our community partners on top, to see student outcomes focused governance. It does my heart good. I think that teachers, support staff, and principals are the next, and we need to do what we need to do to support them, for them to show up for our children. My hope and my goal is that they love our children the way that we do and have high expectations for their learning. All of us don't have that experience, and so that's the work that has to happen. And that central office staff, district leaders, associate superintendents or superintendents and board, they're the ones who support all of this. They're not above us. They're the ones who are pushing the work up. This is Seattle's commitment to eliminating the opportunity gaps, and the 4 areas is high quality instruction and learning experience, predictable and consistent operation systems, culturally responsive workforce, inclusive and authentic engagement. So I just wanted to share that with you. And June, we can go to the next slide. In the group that I was in, I heard like hesitation when they go back and take what they learned here from PTA members in their buildings. And so I think that we forget that we are spiritual vibrational beings, just in our human form. And so we have to go beyond just the physical and the cognitive. And so we have to really look at the whole picture. And often we just see half the picture. And so I offer you these things to really think of and to incorporate in your work. Emotions are energy and our thoughts are energy. And so a lot of times, our thoughts are not high vibration, our emotions are not high vibration. And to be honest, especially over these last 2 years, it's been hard to stay there. I want to tell you a superpower is grace. It transforms negative energy and it helps with the fear and having people to be able to release privilege and entitlement. And that's why I believe in the gracious space model that I've introduced to Seattle Council. And then what is your energetic hygiene? So what I mean by that is, we take a shower, we wash our hands, we wash our face, we brush our teeth. That's all hygiene. But what do you do to release that energy? I mean, being a parent, having a career and just life in general, it takes a lot from us. And so what do you do to take care of the energy you have? Me, I walk. I don't walk for exercise. I walk to release and to connect to the earth. And I get exercise in doing that. And then just being really cognitive of what are your thoughts and your energy fueling. I don't know if you've ever seen a person who comes in the room and they're just full of energy and spirit and love, and the whole energy of the room shifts. And then we also have people who are the opposite way. And so just really being cognizant of what that is. And then how do we honor the thoughts and the energy of others? Often we judge them by the chapter of their life that we come in on, and we never really take the time for the backstory, or we look at actions and we don't really realize that even like children, sometimes our actions are an ask. And so really connecting with, just the energy of people just having good intentions and holding grace for them, even when, we don't show up as the best version of ourselves. And then how do we create synergy in our collective wisdom and energetic power for strategic focus? And there's a little arrow there. There shouldn't be a dot. But together we can really decide what it is that we want to arrive at. What are the agreements and the conditions that we really want, and really focus on the collective goal instead of individualism. And that's PTAs that work together and are successful. They have worked to master that. And then I just want to say the best time to identify supports is before you need them. So really looking at what supports do you really need to have in place. And so these are just some things that I offer to you as well. And then we can go to the next slide. And then Sam, are you comfortable with taking this whole slide, or do you want me to start off?
Why don't you start it off and then I'll jump in? How's that sound?
So our values really drive, where we are. We heard before, some people were saying before PTAs didn't want to have any conversation about, buying staff. It was okay. And now we're having that conversation. So, what is it that you value? And so our values is our why. It's, why we show up. And what will be the emotional response stakeholders should feel and experience. So as we shift to this equity lens and focus, there's emotions. Sometimes there's fear. that come up. And so just really being cognizant of what it is to really set that occasion. So I kind of relate this to having people over for dinner. We set our table and even our house just based on who's coming. So if it's a friend who's always in our house, you know, we might just have dinner the normal way and just invite them to our family dinner. But maybe the in-laws are coming and you clean up and, you know, or, you know, different people come and you bring out the china. So it's similar to that, really setting the occasion, but we're setting the occasion for the emotional response instead of a physical thing. And then what expected method for accomplishing your goal in question. And so a lot of times we put things down, but we don't really look at the method in which we show up. And Sam's going to talk a little bit about policy and practice, but her methods of how she really gets people to have their voice and gives them the information that they need to show up to speak to leaders really speaks to that, because she has really intentionality. She has a goal, but she meets people where they are. And what does the setting need to be for optimal engagement, reciprocity that is based in truth and trust? Some people don't come to our PTA meetings because it's an uncomfortable space. And so sometimes we need to find out why that is. And then sometimes they show up and we don't honor what they have to say or their experience. And so they feel uncomfortable. And so when we have truth and trust, then that's when the work happens. And when we don't have truth and trust, fear creeps in. And so then we have that resistance. And so I want Sam to talk a little bit more about policy and advocacy, and some of the things that that our advocacy and our collective voice has done for our kids.
So one of the things that's important to me, so first of all, thank you, Sabrina. And one of the things that's really important to me is that when we are advocating, we really can't be thinking about just my child, right? We're thinking about every child. We're thinking about the children in our schools. We're thinking about the children of the families who show up and are loud. We're thinking about the children where the families face barriers or don't wish to show up, but those kids still have needs. And we're reaching out and we're trying to make sure that we're lifting up voices and that we're listening, so that we really are advocating in an authentic way, and in a way where we are supporting our communities as a whole, knowing that different people may need different things, and that something that may seem obvious to one person might look really different in a different space, so that we are bringing all of these voices together and really listening. And when we do that, we do find that we have a lot of things in common. And so then we need to start looking at policies and procedures and bills and options. Where are the blocks? Where are the clogs? Who has the power to change something, and where is that power? And we need to let people know the power that they have, because one of the things that happens a lot is that we can get overwhelmed, we can get frustrated, our energy can be, it can just be hard sometimes. This parenting thing's not easy, and these are not easy times. And yet, when we come together and when we work together and when we think about all the different ways that we have things that together we can work on, we can create tremendous amounts of change. And so one of the things I really want to talk about is this past legislative session, the 2022 legislative session that just ended, because so many of you participated in that. And because next year we're going to have another legislative session, and I hope even more of you participate and bring your communities in. We went into this legislative session worried. We went into this legislative session knowing that we had declining enrollment, that this wasn't a budget year, and that typically in the short session, the way the legislature works, there's a long session where they do the budget and the short session where they generally tweak things a little bit. And we went in knowing that we in Seattle wanted $40 million. And we also knew that there was a really good chance that we would get nothing. And we also knew that money wasn't the only thing we wanted. We knew that we had youth in crisis and we needed more nurses. We needed more counselors. We knew, and we've known for a long time, that language equity has been a massive barrier to students and families. And we thought maybe this pandemic, as it highlighted all of these different struggles, we would be able to tell our stories. And so our families told their stories, and they testified, and our families signed in on bills, and we made a real difference. We ended up with enrollment stabilization passing, and I think for enrollment stabilization, it looks like with all of the little pieces that we got put together, we're looking at about $30 million. That's more than half of what we asked for. And I want you to remember that there were times when we thought we would get nothing, and that there was an organized, active parent group out there opposing enrollment stabilization. Like, our families did great. We got 1153, which was a bill to increase language access in public schools, passed. This was huge. Our families turned out. Our families testified. Our families testified in their preferred languages, and we were able to make sure that they got interpreters to speak when they spoke at the legislature, and we were able to support their advocacy, and that was huge. There were this session 2 anti-critical race theory bills came up this session, and we killed them. And we turned out, and we turned out on short notice, and we turned out and we killed those. We made a difference for our kids and for kids across the state. We increased the amount of funding that schools across the state are getting for nurses and counselors, and we will be seeing that increase as it rolls out over the next few years. So we made substantial change, and we also gave our legislators a real heads up that PTA is here, we're active, and we're paying attention. And that's just so important. It is so important. And yes, I see June's posting 0.5 FTE counselors in all Seattle Public Schools elementary schools now. Yes. And I believe we're at a full-time nurse in every middle school in Seattle Public Schools now. So is it good enough? No, it's not good enough. We have so much more we need to do, but we made progress, and we deserve to celebrate that, because all your PTAs showed up, and you did this, and this is about you. And I really hope that, even though budget allocations are hard and there's difficult discussions and things are heavy sometimes, I want you to all take a moment and just really celebrate what you've done and what we're going to do, because we're going to spend some time this interim learning and advocating and getting better at this and getting ready so that we can make more significant change next session, because our kids need that. All of our kids need that, and we can do this. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Sabrina, but thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So this just goes to show that we are stronger together. And when we go and buy staff, we don't hold the system accountable. So what Sam just shared with us is what our collective power can do. And no, it's not enough, but I'm going to be honest, in Olympia, they hear more about the trees and animals than they do about our children. What would it be like if all of us were willing to tell our story and the needs for our kids? We probably would have gotten all 40 million, right? But we're stronger together, and we can go to the next slide. So I do want to say, this meeting is supposed to be over at 8:30. I may go over. I'm going to try not to, but I think it's important to finish out. I believe this recording will be here for you. I want to honor your time, but I also want to make sure that we have the information. I'm going to go quickly over these next slides, but there's some important information at the end that I'm going to need to take a little bit more time with. This slide is the values of PTA: collaboration, commitment, accountability, respect, inclusivity, and integrity. And we can go to the next slide. These are the 4 practices of transformational family engagement. And so as we engage with our families, I want us to remember these, and we can go to the next slide, June. And this is just like really repeating that. Family engagement embraces and values diverse perspectives. Family engagement meets the unique needs of every family and child. Integrated family engagement connects and aligns with the educational system, and impactful family engagement empowers families to support their children's success. And so we can go to the next slide. This next slide, years ago, Seattle Public Schools shifted from the national standards to what you see in the circle. So on the right is the national PTA standards. They are the national standards. They were also adopted by the Department of Education, and they were also adopted by the city of Seattle. I want you to be aware of both of them. Right now, you guys do know we're doing listening sessions with the National PTA to update those standards. And what they're using is what's on the right, and that's what will be updated. We have our final listening session on Thursday for English-based in all families. And so I just really want you to really see this. Family engagement is the #1 indicator of student success. And we can go to the next slide. This slide, I'll let you take a little deeper look at it when you get the PowerPoint, but Seattle Public Schools has just updated their 4 pillars and have put some strategies of what that looks like. And I think it's important for you to be aware of that as well. And then we can go to the next slide. This is a 5-minute video. I think it's really important. It's on the dual capacity framework. Dr. Karen Mapp is the family engagement guru. I do want to tell you the director of family engagement for National PTA, Helen Westmoreland, comes from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and has been a part of this work. And so if we can just watch it, it's going to take 5 minutes.
The first version of the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family School Partnership was launched at the 2014 Family and Community Engagement Conference held by the Institute for Educational Leadership. This research-based framework was authored in collaboration with the United States Department of Education and published by the Southwest Educational Development Lab. The framework was created to offer a tool for educators, policymakers, families, and community members to understand what's needed to cultivate and sustain partnerships between home and school that support student achievement and school improvement. Since 2014, I've gathered information from current research and from stakeholders about what was useful
and what improvements were needed to the framework. Stakeholders suggested that they wanted the new framework to reflect a sense of growth and improvement, and that educators and families come together by building the capacity of each side to work in deeper partnership. Second, the framework needed to more clearly articulate the challenges that got in the way of partnership between families and educators. For example, the new framework points out that many educators have not been exposed to excellent practice, and that's often because they simply haven't received any training in this area. Many families haven't been exposed to excellent practice either, and many have had negative experiences in school, both when they were children and as adults. The way forward starts with the essential conditions, which includes both the process and organizational conditions. These are the nuts and bolts that are a part of any effective family and community engagement practice. The process conditions describe the key components of effective practice to build partnership, and the organizational conditions describe the systems and structures, in other words, the infrastructure needed to support and sustain partnership. One thing that the field stated loud and clear is that all partnerships have to start with trust. We know from the research of Tony Bragg and Barbara Schneider how important relational trust between families and educators is to the effective functioning of a school and to the building of dependable partnerships among the adults. So this was moved to the top of the list in the process conditions. The organizational conditions set the table for the effective execution of the process conditions. The next section highlights the type of growth we should see when all the essential conditions are met. These 4 C's are based on research from my colleague Monica Higgins. We all hear that term capacity building, but what does it actually mean? We know it's important for both sides to improve their knowledge and skills to engage in partnership. But Monica informs us that that's not the only element of capacity building that's important. Who you know, who you can turn to for information, is also an important part of capacity. We have research that reveals that our beliefs and values shift in positive ways as a result of working with others. Last but not least, the confidence of our families and educators to be able to do this work of partnership grows. And finally, in this last section, we see what happens when educators and families build their capacity to work in partnership with each other. We now have a reciprocal exchange that speaks to the power of both families and educators to support each other's continued growth. Educators connect family engagement to their day-to-day work with students and see families as contributors to their children's education. Families engage in various ways that make a big difference for their children's learning. And at the end of the day, we're able to see that this work truly helps us get to the outcome we're all striving for: more effective partnerships that support student and school improvement.
Great. So the dual capacity framework is a part of the work and the family engagement standards for Seattle Public Schools. I won't read all of them, but I do want to read welcoming environments because that's something Seattle Public Schools focuses on. But what you'll see on this slide and the next slide, it goes further into the 6 standards. Welcoming all families into the school community. Families are active participants in the life of the school and feel welcomed, valued, and connected to each other, to the school staff, and to what students are learning and doing in class. And so those are best practices. And so All was added to this in the update, and we'll just briefly go to the next slide. And then these are the last three: speaking up for every child, sharing power, which is something that is hard to do, but we need to work on it, especially with district leaders, and then collaborating with community. And when we collaborate with community, it's really important to collaborate with also community partners that families identify and have connections to. And we can go to the next slide, June. I think that it's important to just really read this statement. This is the National PTA's position statement on family engagement. Family engagement is a shared effort of families, schools, educators, and community leaders to advance programs, practices, and policies that empower families in every facet of the education and development of children from birth to adulthood. Family engagement takes many forms, including parents as first educators, as decision makers about children's education, health, well-being, as well as advocates for children's success. It recognizes that parents, guardians, and families are primary influence in a child's life. According to the Global Family Research Project, when families and educators work together to support students' learning and development, children are more likely to succeed in school, graduate, and stay on their path to college or career. And we can go next slide. PTA recognizes the research which demonstrates when families are engaged, students achieve more regardless of socioeconomics, ethnic or racial backgrounds, or the parent or guardian's education level. The most accurate predictor of a child's achievement in school is not income or social status. Family engagement is essential to the positive emotional and social development, cultural growth, and academic achievement of every child. The task of connecting families and schools is both formidable and attainable. Affirming this significance of family engagement has been a priority of National PTA since its founding in 1897. PTA must function as an independent, nonpartisan child advocacy that reflects the community's collaborative aspirations for all children to protect the educational health and well-being of all children. And you'll see at the bottom, it was adopted in 1991. It's had some iterations, and this is what National PTA is working on right now. And we can go to the next slide. This is work that we really need to do as PTAs. We really need to align. This slide is the template for the DEI work. One of the last slides will give you a lot of the information and also give you the tools to actually have a listening session for the families in your school. Once we get to know who's in our community and actually listen, it helps us to partner. And so it's really important to really know who's in your school, the racial makeup. This comes directly from PTA, and it has Black or African American. But I also think that we have to understand that some of our African families have some different needs. And so we really have to honor those needs and some of the differences. I know when I was at South Shore, one of the important things was having prayer mats and places for our children to play, honoring Ramadan that's coming up. And so it's easy to clump everyone together, but really listen to your families and find out what they need. And we have special ed PTA, but special education is everyone's responsibility. If we're going to talk about one voice for every child, we can't leave them out. And so this toolkit really helps you to really identify, and you can work with your principals because they do have this data as well. So I wanted to share that with you, and we can go to the next slide. This also comes from the diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are the 6 areas that they share: religion, family structure, geography. So geography is also where they live. Sometimes our children might live in the North End and go to school in Southeast Seattle, or not go to a neighborhood school. So knowing where they are is important. Honoring our LGBTQ plus community. Gender is huge. And a lot of times in middle school, gender identity of children start to come out, and then even the ages of who's in your community. So what gaps in representation on your PTA board? What are gaps in representation in your membership? What are gaps in representation in terms of who participates in events and programming? And what are barriers that keep families from participating? And so these are things that you can find out from your community by following some of this work that you'll see, and just using the National PTA diversity, equity, and inclusion resources that are there. And then we can go to the next slide. And so what I find is, so often we're in our silos, in our PTA, trying to sort out problems, and there's a bunch of other PTAs who are trying to sort out those problems. And so we really have to focus on how do we come together as a council of PTAs working together instead of being individual PTAs. So how do we leverage our collective engagement experience and maximize our advocacy networking abilities across the whole district? What does aligning with the district and school-based family engagement look like? And what does family engagement look like, feel like, and function in our school, and then also in our PTA? And so that's work for us to work on. And then this next slide is really about funding, right? Basic education is an investment. Our leaders at our state, our county, and even our city level can do better at funding our education. And so our advocacy is stronger and really focusing on making sure they know our story and understanding the deficits and the shortfalls, because the money that we raise in PTA and a $1.5 billion budget is kind of like the couch money, like when you take off the cushions and you find that change, and sometimes we create inequities. And so I will let June go to the next one. And then this is just something for you to really focus on. This is about implicit bias and just really looking at where we have biases. And this is something you can do on your own. Pick a school-wide program and or focus in your school. What are ways that you perpetrate bias? And then what are ways you can do to help undo those biases? How are we for time? We are going to watch 6 minutes of this next video, and we're almost done, and we might be able to get out of here on time. I think this is important to watch.
When white people claim not to feel safe in discussions of race, right? When we insist that we need ground rules and guidelines to engender trust and safety, I think we're actually perverting the true direction of violence, quite frankly, by using terms like safety and dangerous when merely discussing race, right? I think the word safety out of a white person's mouth on this topic is illegitimate.
Robin, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your book, White Fragility, and your work. To start off with, do you mind just telling us a little bit about what first got you interested in anti-racism work?
I kind of fell into it. I was your classic white liberal. I was late to college. I grew up poor and I didn't go to college till much later in life. And I graduated with a degree in sociology and had no idea what I could do for a living. And I applied for a job as a diversity trainer. And I thought two things that'll show how naive I was. One, that sounds so fun. And two, of course I'm qualified. You know, I'm a vegetarian. How could I be racist? Mm-hmm. And so I got the job and I was in for the most profound learning of my life on two kind of parallel tracks. And the first one was that I was working side by side with people of color who were challenging the way I saw the world and my place in it. And part of being white is I could be that far in life and never have had my worldview challenged, my racial worldview. I wouldn't even been able to tell you I had a racial worldview, right? I was just a person. And certainly I had never had it challenged in a sustained way by people of color. And so I was like a fish being taken out of water. And then the second part of that process was going into the workplace, which was overwhelmingly white, and facilitating side by side with a person of color these mandated diversity trainings. And the hostility was jaw-dropping. The meanness, the anger, the defensiveness. But the patterns were so consistent, and I had some really patient and brilliant mentorship from the people of color I was working with. And over time, I just got better and better at not only understanding how we pull this off, this claim that race has no meaning in our lives, even as we live profoundly separate and unequal lives, but also really good at articulating that to other white people. And so I went on to get my PhD. But I certainly wasn't born and certainly wasn't educated in the mainstream system to see any of this.
So I'm curious to know if you have done much work with educators and if you see any applications for your work specifically in K-12 school settings.
Absolutely. I am a former professor of education. So I've worked many years in large teacher training programs. To be really blunt, I think our education system is the belly of the beast, along with Hollywood, basically. Hollywood pumps out the stories, the images, the representations, and schools reproduce inequality by basically being sorting mechanisms, and our schools sort children into unequal places in society. I think everyone knows that. If we didn't know that, we would not care what schools our children went to. But do we care what schools our children go to? Oh, yes. And will we go across town and to great inconvenience to get them into a better school so they have a better chance? Even as we say, gosh, we don't know any people of color in our neighborhood, so how are we supposed to get to know people, right? We'll make effort where we want something for our children. I think teachers are critical, and I think regardless of intentions, when you have an overwhelmingly white teaching force, right, we have a very racially homogeneous teaching force, you inevitably have the reproduction and the dissemination of racism and white supremacy just by virtue of the homogeneity, right? Most of those white teachers grew up in mostly white neighborhoods, went to mostly white schools, rarely, if ever, had a teacher themselves who wasn't white. And that's just the teachers. We haven't talked about the curriculum, the testing, the tracking, the funding, right? Schools are just incredibly efficient at reproducing racial inequality.
Why is it so hard for white people to see racism in themselves and other good white people?
You know, it's not one single thread. That's the way I think about it. It's a series of threads that come together to create a kind of irrational stew just below the surface, right? It doesn't take much for that to erupt. So probably a really foundational one is what I think of as the good-bad binary. We're taught to think about a racist as an individual who consciously does not like somebody based on race and intentionally seeks to be mean to them. individual conscious malintent. If that's my definition of a racist and what it takes to be racist, and you say, you know, intended or not, what you just said was racially problematic, what I'm going to hear is that you're saying I'm intentionally mean, you know, and intended to cause harm. And now I'm going to need to defend my moral character. And when you change the question, you change the possible responses or solutions, right? So that changes the question from, is this or isn't this racist, which is what dominant culture always asks. Was he or wasn't he racist? You know, and then, you know, debate ensues. It changes the question from if to how. And it's incredibly liberating to change the question, because now I can just stop defending and denying and deflecting and explaining away and just get to work trying to figure out, okay, well, how was I shaped by this system? I was. How was I? How can I use all the things that I see as unique and special about me and apply them to figuring out how I got set up, and then what I might do to interrupt that. And that leads to another key reason it's so hard to talk to white people, and that is the precious ideology of individualism. It's really precious. And we are reinforced in this idea that we're each unique and different. And yes, we are individuals. We are also members of a social group. You know, I often tell white people, you're going to be fine. Suspend your uniqueness for just a minute. You'll be fine. It's well protected out there in daily life. And just move over here and grapple with what it means to be a member of this group. When it comes to race, we just want to insist that it has no meaning. You really cannot grow up or spend any significant time in this culture and not internalize an understanding that it's better to be white. The research shows that children, by 3 to 4, all children understand it's better to be white. There's a sense of entitlement to what we have, right? The ideology of meritocracy that says, you know, whatever I have is purely from my efforts, right? And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying white people don't struggle, don't face barriers, don't suffer, but we don't struggle, suffer, and face that barrier. And it's huge. It's a huge barrier. And not facing it, of course, impacts the outcome of my efforts and my work.
So in a nutshell, what is white fragility?
Well,
Sure.
Yeah, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. What she says here is very profound. This teaching tolerance is something that Seattle Public School uses for their professional development. At the end, you will see some resources on some of the anti-racism resources from Seattle Public Schools. But I do want to read this quote, and we may end up getting out of here on time. Diversity is not a casual liberal tolerance of something not yourself. It is not polite accommodation. Instead, diversity is an action, the sometimes painful awareness that people, other races, other voices, other habits of mind have as much integrity of belonging as much claim on the world as you do. And I urge you, amidst all the differences present to the eye and the mind, to reach out to the bond that will protect us all. We are meant to be here together. And this is from a book called The Language of Action. And we can go to the next slide. These are some call to action SMART goals that you can go over and look at. Some of the information under family engagement is really asking for a family engagement specialist in a school, and that's not a family support worker. This is someone who engages families and connects. And so I offer those to you, and then we can go to the the next slide, June. This right here is your homework. So it is important for us as PTAs to really align with the goals of our school. Our continuous school improvement plan is something that every school has. It's something that they are required to submit to OSPI, the Office of Public Instructions. And so I asked you to go and to find your school CSIP and to find out what stands out. What does it align with? Does it align with the work that your PTA is currently doing? And then how do you leverage the information in your school CSIP to build stronger partnerships with your school, school leaders and teachers, your families, students, district, and even our elected leaders? I know that when we talk apple to apples with our principals and our building leaders, and they know that we understand the CSIP and we're not just coming in with our own wants and needs, but girth that, it is a stronger partnership. And so the final part there, you can find your continuous school improvement plans. And then your BLTs, your building leadership team, is also defined in your continuous school improvement plan. So those are the 4 questions that I asked for you to do that. And I am sorry that I have blue. I did not read to do that. And Jonna let me know that she can't read that part. And it's something that I shouldn't do. So I'm going to read it and then I'm going to change it before I send it out. And so I just want to read it for her real quick. Continuous School Improvement Plan, CSIP, is the top part. The Continuous School Improvement Plan is an action plan for each school that identifies the area, a school plan to focus on the current and coming school year and performance goals that we want students to achieve, and how the school plans to collaboratively meet those goals. The plan are updated regularly to reflect the status being used, the strategies being used at each school. This document also serves as the school-wide improvement plan. And then there's some information for Title I schools and a link to learn about Title I schools. And then the 4 things that I read, and Jonna, we will change this color before we send this out. And then we can just go to there. We can go to the next slide. That's just my information, but let's go to this final slide. These are resources, and I'll change this from blue as well. So this is the diversity, equity, and inclusion information. So if you push on these links, local leaders' guides to diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a DEI template. Our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is another document. How to welcome diverse perspectives in your PTA. And then the final one, enhancing diversity, equity, inclusion facilitators guide, will guide you to being able to have a listening session with your school community. In June, we can just go to the next ones just to share. This is what I talked about. The blue is the hyperlink, so I don't know what to do about that. But these are the Seattle Public Schools anti-racist information, and you'll see teaching tolerance is there. And so those are resources that you can have and you can use. And so we can get down with the PowerPoint. I am sorry that I talked a lot at you. There's a lot of information, but I just want to take a couple minutes to open it up for any questions or comments or anything anyone wants to share before we close out. Erica, you want to go ahead? I think we have 2 Ericas, so Goodmanson, and then we'll go to the other Erica after that.
Okay, I just had a question. I'm with Whitman Middle School. They don't have a CSIP this year, and they said that they did away with them. I don't know if that's really true everywhere, or, but they don't have one. So they've got like loose internal goals, and it's been, I don't know what else to pull from for that.
Okay. Erica, can you put your information in the chat, and I will find out and get you what you need?
And Sabrina, I just put the link to all the CSIPs in the chat.
Yeah, it's something that's required. And so in those resources on the CSIP, it's there, but Aaron also put the link there. It's something that's required for OSPI. So I'm not sure what's happening at your building level, but take a look online, and then I will do some further information to connect with you one-on-one on what I found out. So, and then the next, Erica.
Hi, thank you for the presentation tonight. Just wanted to ask a question about if you're seeing that your school CSIP is missing something that you think might contribute to better valuing families at the school level. What are some ways that folks who maybe have been doing PTA for a while have seen to work with building leaders to help them think about how to engage those families a little bit more?
So sharing that with your building leader, but to be honest, that's why I want you all to really look at your continuous school improvement plan. So our next meeting, that we can really be together, discuss the things that's missing, and instead of just in silo, have a collective plan and a collective theme. And also, as Seattle Council PTSA works with district leaders, also being a voice to help for systemic change. Did I answer that enough for you?
Yeah, I think so. I realize, you know, as PTA, it's not our role to tell the building leaders what their improvement should be, but just thinking that if there are areas where we're seeing they're not focusing, you know, what is an effective way to kind of work with them to make that change happen. So I think definitely, you know, talking about it more at the next meeting. But that was just the question that kind of came to my mind.
And part of that is at the building level, really collaborating with community and listening to community. CSIPs are done many different ways in the building, but if our building leader doesn't know that that's a need or something families would like to see, and it's not on their radar, it might not be there. But if they're hearing something from enough families and missing a need, then there's that dialogue, right?
Okay.
So it's the how, right? And
yeah,
offering it to you, this is what we see. And, you know, from, you know, listening to families in our community, this is what we're hearing. And if we focused on this, these are the outcomes that we might be able to accomplish together. So, yeah.
Okay. So just like anything else, focus on that relationship building piece.
Yeah, that relationship building and really sharing, you know, the why and that it's a reoccurring theme that we hear with families.
Great, thank you.
Jana?
Thank you, Sabrina, and I appreciate you being flexible and reading it for me.
No problem.
It's appreciated. I'm really glad you do that. And anyway, so I have a question. So I heard before I myself tried, 1 second, kiddos, sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
I guess I have to
The
parent.
job of a parent, they always get you when you're,
You know, they're the most talkative when, yeah. So my question is, because I'm having a hard time, it's something that I heard about before from other people. And now I'm dealing with this thing. So I asked questions about the BLT, and not that I needed to add something to my schedule or to-do list, but I felt like, you know, we didn't have any representation of parents with kids with disabilities, and it shows. And now we have two new leaders that are very much inexperienced, at least one of them super new. And I'm asking, you know, they were asking for BLT, for parents to join BLT, you know, somebody from upper elementary or middle school. I have a 5th grader, and not a new parent, but because they already have young, you know, parents of younger kids, and ideally somebody who has a kid with an IEP. I'm like, hello, I have 2. So, and first I wasn't hearing back when I inquired. And then within 2 weeks, I finally asked in a public meeting, and I was told, well, just email me. So I tried again. Basically, I'm being blocked from getting information. And, you know, I finally received so-called BLT bylaws, but it says old BLT bylaws. It doesn't say how the parents or how anybody on the team is nominated, or because I don't think they're supposed to be appointed. It's just really strange. I'm asking who is on the BLT. I'm not getting response at all. Just strange, because I go to IP meetings with the principals. So, you know, so I would like any kind of wisdom from that area. What can we do?
does anyone else from council want to jump in on that one? So BLTs, I'm going to tell you how our BLT worked at South Shore, and I don't know. I mean, I've been on BLT under 3 principals. It was normally a decision of the principal. So I don't know how it works in other buildings. I do know before my presidency in 2016, it had been like 16 years since we've even had BLT trainings. And I think under Dr. Scarlett in 2016 or 2017, we had like the first BLT training, and she was going to work with parents, and things happened. And so that's something that we'll have to ask. I really don't have the answer. I've, you know, worked with people. I know some schools have students. I know Garfield did. I had the honor of working with those 2 as well. And so that's something that that I'll have to ask, because I think it's like many things in Seattle public schools. It varies from building to building and based on who the leader is. And so.
Right. I mean, because I was told in one meeting, yeah, reach out. And when I reached out, well, we don't need any more parents. And so I asked, who is the 3rd person? And it's a word I'm gonna, so I don't know if there is no 3rd person, they would rather go without than me, which is possible. Or if there is somebody, and why is it secret, right? Because I hear some people have meetings that are open, and these seem to be very secret. Thank you.
The other thing I want to say, at your PTA meetings, we ask for BLT reports. And so sometimes that comes from the principal, but just being able to share some of that information. As when I was a BLT representative, I always shared what was going on at the BLT in a PTA meeting. So
that's not happening in our school.
You know, just to share, because a lot of information happens there. And so, yeah,
Right.
we have a long way to go with BLTs. We've come far, but we still have work to do.
Right. Because when I asked the president in my local school, she said that's the principles. That's not, doesn't have to do with anything with PTA. And I thought that's interesting, but maybe that's true in our school. But I'm disappointed because we should have some sort of role. Like, I don't know. Thank you, Sabrina.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And I'll just, this is Sam, and I'll just jump in and say that I've been at a couple different buildings. It's, in my experience, and from what I've heard from other folks, it is the principal typically who chooses who's on that BLT. And I've seen BLT done in very different ways. My understanding is that there's supposed to be some level of family representation, family engagement. But the BLT comes out of a labor agreement, and so there's different understandings or interpretations of what that means. So I was at a building where, you know, BLT meetings were not really easy to access, but we had a report out from the BLT rep to the PTA, and I'm at a building now where I am on the BLT. And we have student members of the BLT. We've got a 6th grader and 2 8th graders on as voting members on the BLT, and also anybody who wants to come is welcome. And the BLT minutes are posted in Schoology. So there's very, very different approaches from what I can see.
We're a little bit over. We got to the time that I asked you. So I really want to thank you, and I really want to honor your time. Our next meeting, I would really like us to go from our continuous school improvement plans and have us working together more, and have Sam come in a little bit more on advocacy and to help for us to have our collective voice together. I don't have that date, so I'll get the next date. Seattle Council has a lot going on their calendar, and so I want to have a cadence. So we will be able to have a regular schedule for this meeting, and we will be doing family engagement, DEI together, and adding advocacy, because I think it's really important for us to have that as a braid and for us to share our collective wisdom and to support each other across the district so that we're working smarter together instead of working harder in silos. And so, you know, I thank you for your time. I'm going to clean up a couple things on this PowerPoint, and we'll work on getting this out to you tomorrow. I encourage you to share, but I also encourage you to share the history of PTA with your PTA at your meeting, because a lot of people don't have that information. So we are done. Good night. And if you haven't, put your school community and your position in the chat. And thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all you do for kids.